In the marble halls of Renaissance Florence, where power shifted like shadows at dusk, Niccolò Machiavelli observed a truth that would echo through centuries: those who clung most desperately to outcomes were invariably crushed by them, while those who learned to release their grip on results wielded influence with an almost supernatural ease. This observation, born from years of diplomatic intrigue and political upheaval, reveals one of humanity's most counterintuitive strategic principles: that true power emerges not from controlling outcomes, but from transcending the need to control them. The concept appears paradoxical at first glance. How can one gain the upper hand by letting go? How does releasing our grip on desired results actually strengthen our position? The answer lies in understanding what Machiavelli truly meant by power, and, more importantly, what he understood about the nature of human weakness and strength. When Machiavelli wrote about destroying one's weak self, he wasn't advocating for self-hatred or nihilistic destruction. Instead, he was pointing toward a fundamental transformation, the conscious dissolution of those aspects of our character that make us predictable, manipulable, and ultimately powerless. The weak self, in Machiavellian terms, is the collection of ego-driven desires, fears, and attachments that cloud our judgment and compromise our strategic position. Consider the merchant princes of Machiavelli's time, men who accumulated vast fortunes yet lived in constant terror of losing them. Their attachment to their wealth made them vulnerable to every fluctuation in trade, every political shift, every rumor in the marketplace. They had gained material power but remained enslaved by their own success. In contrast, those who had learned to hold their possessions lightly, who could engage fully in the game of commerce while remaining internally detached from its outcomes, moved through the same volatile environment with grace and adaptability. This principle extends far beyond material wealth. The weak self manifests whenever we become so invested in a particular outcome that we lose our ability to respond flexibly to changing circumstances. It appears when our ego becomes so entangled with a project, relationship, or goal that we cannot see clearly, cannot adapt our strategy, and cannot accept feedback that might redirect our efforts. The weak self is the part of us that says, "This must happen exactly as I envision it, or I am worthless." Machiavelli understood that this attachment creates multiple vulnerabilities. First, it makes us predictable. When others know what we desperately want or fear to lose, they possess the keys to manipulating us. Second, it narrows our vision. Obsession with specific outcomes blinds us to alternative paths that might be more effective or fulfilling. Third, it creates internal tension that clouds our judgment and drains our energy. Fourth, it makes us brittle. When our carefully laid plans inevitably encounter unexpected obstacles, we shatter rather than bend. The transformation Machiavelli advocated requires us to distinguish between engagement and attachment. The person who has destroyed their weak self doesn't become passive or indifferent. Instead, they develop the capacity to engage fully in any endeavor while maintaining internal freedom from its results. They can pursue goals with complete dedication while simultaneously holding those goals lightly enough to abandon or modify them when circumstances change. This internal shift creates what might be called strategic fluidity, the ability to respond to changing conditions without being emotionally destabilized by unexpected developments. When we're not attached to specific outcomes, we can see opportunities that others miss because we're not blinded by our own expectations. We can make decisions based on current reality rather than on what we wish reality to be. We can adapt our methods, change our goals, or even abandon entire projects without experiencing the psychological devastation that typically accompanies such changes. The practical implications of this shift are profound. In negotiations, the person who truly doesn't need the deal often gets the best terms, because their lack of desperation allows them to walk away from unfavorable conditions. In relationships, those who love without clinging create space for genuine intimacy to flourish, while those who grasp too tightly often strangle what they're trying to preserve. In creative endeavors, artists who can let go of preconceived notions about their work often produce their most innovative and powerful pieces. Machiavelli's insight also reveals why external attempts to destroy us often fail when we've already destroyed our weak self. When someone tries to manipulate us through our attachments, they find nothing to grasp. When they threaten what we think we cannot live without, they discover that we've already learned to live without it. When they attempt to wound us by attacking our ego, they encounter someone who has already transcended the need for ego validation. This doesn't mean becoming invulnerable in the sense of feeling no pain or experiencing no disappointment. Rather, it means developing the capacity to experience these emotions without being controlled by them. The person who has destroyed their weak self can feel sadness at a loss without being devastated by it, can experience anger at an injustice without being consumed by it, can feel fear in the face of danger without being paralyzed by it. The process of destroying the weak self is not a one-time event but an ongoing practice of conscious self-observation and gradual detachment from ego-driven patterns. It requires developing the ability to witness our own emotional reactions without being swept away by them. It involves cultivating what psychologists now call emotional regulation and what spiritual traditions have long recognized as the foundation of wisdom. One of the most effective ways to begin this transformation is through what might be called outcome experimentation, deliberately practicing non-attachment in low-stakes situations and gradually expanding this capacity to areas of greater personal significance. This might involve placing a bid on an item at auction while genuinely not caring whether we win, approaching a challenging conversation with a genuine willingness to accept any reasonable outcome, or pursuing a creative project while being truly open to it evolving in unexpected directions. The practice of letting go of outcomes also requires developing a different relationship with failure and success. Both become information rather than judgment. Failure becomes feedback about what approaches don't work under current conditions, while success becomes data about effective strategies rather than validation of personal worth. This shift transforms our entire approach to goal setting and achievement, making us more experimental, more resilient, and ultimately more effective. Machiavelli understood that this internal transformation would inevitably reflect in external results. When we stop needing others to respond to us in specific ways, we often find that they respond more positively. When we stop desperately chasing particular opportunities, we become more attractive to better opportunities. When we stop trying to force outcomes through willpower alone, we become more skillful at creating conditions that naturally lead to favorable results. The paradox resolves itself when we realize that true control, the kind that actually produces consistent results, comes not from trying to manipulate external circumstances but from mastering our internal responses to whatever circumstances arise. This mastery creates a kind of unshakable foundation from which we can engage with the world more effectively than ever before. Part 2. The Architecture of Inner Sovereignty. The transition from outcome-dependent thinking to strategic detachment requires understanding what Machiavelli called the architecture of inner sovereignty, the internal structures and practices that allow one to maintain autonomy regardless of external circumstances. This architecture consists of several interconnected elements that together create an unassailable inner fortress, one that cannot be conquered because it cannot be attacked through conventional means. The foundation of this inner sovereignty lies in what Machiavelli observed among the most effective leaders of his time: a clear separation between identity and circumstances. Those who wielded lasting influence had learned to define themselves not by their possessions, positions, or achievements, but by something more fundamental: their capacity to respond consciously to whatever situations arose. This distinction proves crucial because circumstances are largely beyond our control, while our responses remain within our domain even under the most challenging conditions. Building this foundation requires developing what contemporary psychology might call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe our own thinking processes without being trapped by them. When we can watch our mind generating desires, fears, and expectations without automatically believing or acting on them, we create space for more conscious choice. This space is where true power resides, because it's where we can select our responses based on strategic effectiveness rather than emotional compulsion. The practice of developing this awareness often begins with simple observation exercises. Throughout the day, we can notice when we catch ourselves becoming attached to specific outcomes. We might observe the subtle tension that arises when we send an important email and find ourselves checking repeatedly for a response. We might notice the anxiety that emerges when we're waiting for news about a job application, or the frustration when a project doesn't unfold as we envisioned. These moments of attachment aren't problems to be solved but opportunities to practice non-identification. The second structural element of inner sovereignty involves cultivating what Machiavelli recognized as strategic patience, the capacity to act decisively when action is called for while remaining content to wait when waiting serves us better. This quality distinguishes true strategic thinking from mere impulsiveness or reactivity. Strategic patience allows us to plant seeds without obsessing over when they'll sprout, to make investments without constantly checking their performance, to extend invitations without attachment to whether they're accepted. Developing strategic patience requires understanding the difference between productive action and anxious activity. Productive action moves us toward our objectives through well-considered steps taken at appropriate timing. Anxious activity, by contrast, represents our ego's attempt to control outcomes through busy work that often proves counterproductive. Learning to recognize this difference allows us to channel our energy more effectively while avoiding the exhaustion that comes from constant striving. The third element involves mastering what might be called emotional aikido, the ability to redirect emotional energy rather than suppressing or expressing it destructively. When someone attempts to provoke us, instead of either exploding in anger or bottling up our reaction, we can use the energy of our emotional response as information about the situation and fuel for our strategic response. This approach transforms potentially destabilizing emotions into strategic assets. Consider how this principle applies in negotiations. When the other party makes an insulting offer, our natural emotional response might be offense or anger. Rather than either expressing these emotions directly or pretending they don't exist, we can recognize them as signals that the negotiation has moved into a different phase. The emotional energy can then be channeled into a more sophisticated strategic response, perhaps a creative counteroffer that reframes the entire discussion, or a strategic pause that allows time for the other party to reconsider their position. The fourth structural element involves developing what Machiavelli called fortune's friendship, the ability to work with circumstances rather than against them. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of unfavorable conditions, but rather the skill of recognizing how current circumstances, however challenging, might be leveraged toward our objectives. Every situation contains potential opportunities for those who can see clearly enough to recognize them. This principle transforms our relationship with obstacles and setbacks. Instead of viewing them as evidence that we're moving in the wrong direction or that the universe is working against us, we can examine them as information about how to adjust our approach. A rejected proposal might reveal important information about what the decision makers actually value. A failed relationship might clarify what we truly need in partnership. A business setback might redirect us toward a more sustainable or fulfilling path. The fifth element consists of what might be termed strategic indifference, the capacity to remain genuinely open to multiple outcomes without preferring one so strongly that it compromises our judgment. This indifference isn't born of nihilism or depression but of confidence in our ability to work effectively with whatever emerges. When we truly believe we can create value and find meaning regardless of which specific outcomes manifest, we stop needing reality to conform to our preferences. Practicing strategic indifference often reveals how much mental and emotional energy we typically waste on trying to control uncontrollable variables. When we stop investing this energy in outcomes, it becomes available for more productive purposes, developing skills, building relationships, creating value, or simply enjoying the process of engaging with challenging situations. The architecture of inner sovereignty also requires understanding the relationship between personal boundaries and strategic flexibility. Strong boundaries protect our inner sovereignty by ensuring that others cannot manipulate us through guilt, fear, or false obligations. Simultaneously, strategic flexibility allows us to adapt our methods and, sometimes even our goals when circumstances change. The key lies in being rigid about our core principles while remaining fluid about everything else. This balance appears clearly in how we handle criticism and praise. Someone with inner sovereignty can receive feedback about their work without taking it as commentary on their worth as a person. They can accept compliments without becoming dependent on external validation, and they can hear criticism without becoming defensive. Both praise and criticism become information that might be useful for improving their effectiveness rather than emotional experiences that destabilize their sense of self. The practice of building inner sovereignty also involves regular examination of our motivations. Why do we want what we think we want? Are we pursuing certain outcomes because they align with our authentic values and interests, or because we believe they'll provide security, status, or approval from others? This examination helps us distinguish between desires that emerge from our deeper wisdom and those that spring from ego needs or social conditioning. One particularly powerful practice involves regularly asking ourselves, what would I do in this situation if I couldn't fail, and what would I do if failure were guaranteed? Often, these two scenarios point toward the same course of action, one based on authentic engagement rather than outcome manipulation. This convergence suggests we've found an approach aligned with our deeper purposes rather than our ego attachments. The development of inner sovereignty typically proceeds through stages. Initially, we might achieve brief moments of genuine non-attachment, usually in situations that don't matter much to us. Gradually, we can extend this capacity to areas of greater significance. Advanced practitioners can maintain their inner sovereignty even when pursuing their most important objectives, engaging fully without grasping, caring deeply without clinging. This progression requires patience with ourselves and recognition that developing inner sovereignty is itself a process we cannot control through willpower alone. The transformation happens through consistent practice rather than dramatic breakthroughs, through countless small choices to respond consciously rather than reactively, through daily decisions to hold our goals lightly while pursuing them wholeheartedly. The ultimate fruit of this inner architecture is what Machiavelli recognized as true invulnerability, not the absence of challenges or losses, but the presence of an unshakable center that remains stable regardless of external circumstances. From this center, we can engage with life more fully because we're not constantly protecting ourselves from outcomes we fear or desperately chasing ones we crave. We can take intelligent risks because we're not afraid of failure, and we can receive success without becoming intoxicated by it. Part 3, The Invincible Self in Action. The transformation from weakness to invincibility through strategic non-attachment reveals itself most clearly not in moments of victory, but in how one handles adversity, uncertainty, and the inevitable failures that mark any ambitious life. Machiavelli understood that the person who had successfully destroyed their weak self would demonstrate certain unmistakable characteristics when facing the storms of fortune, characteristics that would make them formidable allies and impossible to truly defeat. In the practical realm of human interaction, this transformation manifests as what might be called outcome independence, the ability to engage authentically with others without needing them to respond in any particular way. This quality proves magnetic because most people encounter so few individuals who interact with them without hidden agendas or emotional neediness. When someone approaches a conversation, negotiation, or relationship without desperate attachment to specific results, they create space for genuine connection and mutual benefit to emerge naturally. Consider how this principle operates in professional contexts. The job candidate who genuinely doesn't need the position often conducts the most compelling interview, because their lack of desperation allows them to focus on whether the role actually fits their interests and abilities rather than on trying to manipulate the interviewer's perception. Similarly, the entrepreneur who can pitch their idea while being truly open to rejection or modification often finds that investors are more willing to engage seriously, because the absence of desperate energy suggests confidence in the underlying value proposition. This outcome independence extends to how we handle criticism and conflict. The person who has destroyed their weak self can receive feedback without becoming defensive, because their sense of worth isn't threatened by information about how their performance might be improved. They can engage in disagreements without needing to win, focusing instead on understanding different perspectives and finding solutions that serve everyone involved. This approach often leads to better outcomes than aggressive advocacy, because others feel heard rather than attacked. The invincible self also demonstrates remarkable adaptability when circumstances change unexpectedly. Instead of wasting energy lamenting that reality doesn't match their preferences, they quickly assess new conditions and adjust their approach accordingly. This flexibility proves especially valuable during periods of disruption, when those who cling to outdated strategies or past successes often find themselves increasingly irrelevant. In Machiavelli's observation, this adaptability stems from understanding that all external circumstances are temporary. Wealth can be lost, positions can be eliminated, relationships can end, and health can deteriorate. However, the capacity to respond consciously to whatever arises remains constant as long as we maintain it through practice. This recognition liberates us from the exhausting task of trying to make temporary things permanent and allows us to invest our energy in developing capabilities that truly endure. The practical application of these principles requires understanding how to engage fully while maintaining internal freedom. This might seem contradictory. How can we commit ourselves completely to a project or relationship while simultaneously holding it lightly? The resolution lies in recognizing that full engagement doesn't require emotional attachment. We can bring all of our skills, creativity, and energy to bear on a situation while remaining open to outcomes we didn't anticipate or desire. This approach transforms how we handle setbacks and failures. Instead of experiencing them as personal defeats that diminish our worth, we can receive them as information about what approaches work under what conditions. A business failure becomes data about market conditions, timing, or strategic execution rather than evidence of personal inadequacy. A relationship ending becomes information about compatibility and growth rather than proof of our unlovability. This reframing allows us to learn more quickly and take intelligent risks without being paralyzed by fear of failure. The invincible self also demonstrates a particular relationship with time that differs markedly from how most people experience temporal pressure. Instead of being driven by impatience or paralyzed by perfectionism, they can act decisively when action is needed while remaining content to wait when waiting serves them better. This temporal sovereignty allows them to recognize the natural rhythms in various types of endeavors and to align their efforts accordingly. In relationships, this temporal wisdom might manifest as giving others space to process difficult conversations rather than demanding immediate resolution. In creative work, it might mean allowing projects to evolve at their own pace rather than forcing premature completion. In career development, it might involve building skills steadily over years rather than expecting rapid advancement. This patience isn't passive but strategic, based on understanding how various types of growth actually occur. The development of invincibility also requires cultivating what might be called strategic emptiness, creating internal space that isn't filled with compulsive thoughts, emotions, or activities. This emptiness allows for more conscious responses because we're not constantly reacting from past conditioning or future anxieties. It also creates capacity for genuine listening, creative insight, and intuitive understanding that can provide significant advantages in complex situations. Practicing strategic emptiness might involve regular periods of silence or meditation, times when we deliberately step back from the constant stream of input and output that characterizes modern life. During these periods, we can observe our mental and emotional patterns without being caught up in them, gradually developing the capacity to maintain this observational space even during active engagement with challenging situations. The invincible self also demonstrates remarkable clarity about personal boundaries and authentic desires. Because they're not driven by ego needs or social expectations, they can distinguish between what they genuinely want to pursue and what they think they should want. This clarity allows for more authentic choices, which tend to be both more sustainable and more successful because they align with the person's actual interests and abilities. This authenticity extends to how they communicate with others. Instead of saying what they think others want to hear or what will manipulate desired responses, they can speak truthfully while remaining sensitive to timing and context. This combination of honesty and skillfulness often proves more persuasive than manipulation, because others sense the absence of hidden agendas and respond with greater trust and openness. The culmination of destroying one's weak self appears in what Machiavelli recognized as true fearlessness, not the absence of fear as an emotion, but freedom from being controlled by fear. The invincible person can feel afraid without being paralyzed, can acknowledge uncertainty without being overwhelmed, can face potential loss without being desperate to avoid it. This fearlessness allows for bold action when boldness is called for and patient waiting when patience serves better. This quality proves especially valuable in leadership situations, where others naturally gravitate toward those who remain calm and clear-headed under pressure. The leader who isn't desperately trying to maintain their position can make decisions based on what actually serves the situation rather than what protects their ego or status. This approach often leads to better outcomes and greater respect from those they lead. The invincible self also exhibits a particular relationship with success that prevents it from becoming a source of weakness. They can achieve their goals without becoming attached to maintaining those achievements, enjoy recognition without becoming dependent on external approval, and accumulate resources without being enslaved by the need to preserve them. This relationship with success allows for continued growth and risk-taking rather than the stagnation that often accompanies the fear of losing what we've gained. In practical terms, this might manifest as the successful entrepreneur who remains willing to invest in new ventures rather than simply protecting their existing wealth. Or the accomplished artist who continues to experiment with new forms rather than repeating past successes. Or the effective leader who remains open to feedback and willing to change their approach rather than becoming rigid in their methods. The journey toward invincibility through destroying one's weak self ultimately reveals itself as a path toward greater aliveness and effectiveness rather than detachment from life. By releasing our grip on specific outcomes, we become free to engage more fully with whatever opportunities and challenges arise. By destroying the aspects of ourselves that make us predictable and manipulable, we become more authentically ourselves. By learning to find our center regardless of external circumstances, we become capable of bringing our best qualities to bear on whatever situations we encounter. This transformation serves not only our own development but also our capacity to contribute meaningfully to others' lives. The person who has achieved inner sovereignty can offer support without creating dependence, can provide guidance without manipulation, can love without possessiveness. These qualities make them invaluable as friends, colleagues, leaders, and partners, creating a positive feedback loop that reinforces their strategic position while serving the broader good. The ultimate paradox of Machiavelli's insight reveals itself here. By seeking to gain nothing for the ego, we position ourselves to receive everything that truly matters. By destroying the weak self that desperately pursues external validation, we develop the strong self that naturally attracts respect and affection. By letting go of outcomes, we gain the upper hand in the deepest sense, not through domination or manipulation, but through the kind of authentic power that emerges when we're no longer afraid of losing what we never really possessed in the first place. This transformation remains available to anyone willing to undertake the patient work of self-observation and gradual detachment from ego-driven patterns. It requires no special talents or favorable circumstances, only the commitment to practice conscious response rather than unconscious reaction, strategic patience rather than anxious striving, and authentic engagement rather than outcome manipulation. The path is simple but not easy, accessible but demanding, and available to all who recognize that true power begins with mastery of the only domain we can actually control, our own responses to whatever life presents.